Hello, and thank you for joining us today in our studies of 2 Samuel. Today we're in 2 Samuel chapter 23. And as we enter into this chapter, we have a couple of different messages that take place at the end of David's life, but actually talk about things that occur throughout the time that David was the king of Israel. And so we want to take just a moment and examine each of these aspects somewhat independently. The first one is seen in the first few verses of chapter 23, and it has to do with David's last words. The things that David said at the end of his life, his final words, as it were, to those around him. And one of the key components that you find in the midst of these last words is he talks about what God's expectations are for rulers. He talks about what it is that God is looking for in men, but you also hear an admonition in David, or an admission rather, in David. In verse 5, he says, "Although my house is not so with God, yet he has made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things and secure. For this is all my salvation and all my desire. Will he not make it increase?" He says here that he recognizes that his household, that his family, has not lived up to the expectations that God has put in place, and that even he himself has not been perfect. And certainly, as we've read 2 Samuel, we see a number of the failures and a number of the shortcomings, but we also see the rebellions and the various other things that take place over the course of David's life that would show that this is David being honest about the situation. And this is David admitting the failures and the shortcomings, not just of himself, but of his family as well. And one of the things that he talks about in the previous verses, going back up to verses 2 and 3, is the fact that God says that he who rules over men must be just. And there have been times where even David has not been just in his dealings and in his rulings, especially when it comes to his family. And so we see here in David's last words, not just a statement of what God's expectations are and of glorifying God and of praising God, but also admitting the shortcomings of he and his family when it comes to the expectations of God. And it's very important to pull that out of that particular passage to be able to see both measures of what David is saying. The second thing in chapter 23 is when you get into the list of individuals who were considered to be David's mighty men. Here you have a list of 37 different men, some of which were with David at the beginning, some of which seemingly were with him toward the end, some of which were with him throughout the time. But many of these individuals are going to be ones that are with him very early on in the days, even when he's running from Saul. And these are going to be men that had been loyal and that had been very brave and very strongly willed in their service to David. So many times we look at David and we see him as a one-man band with just a bunch of weak little followers that were around him. And yet that's not the case at all, as this particular chapter points out. You have a number of individuals who are here given places of honor. They are given names of recognition and names of honor in their service under King David. They are men of renown. They are men who have done great deeds. They are men who have fought strongly for the people of Israel, and they have overcome great obstacles in order to serve both their king and their people. And here they are given recognition that is justly due for their actions. Remember that many of the events of these men take place in great battles. And so it's not necessarily that one man went out and fought against a great multitude, but rather that within the confines of these battles and within the confines of these wars, great things were done. We still do the same thing for our soldiers and for those who are worthy of honor in our service today. But here you see it with David's men. Here, these are men that are his captains. These are men that are the leaders of his army. These are men who proved themselves to be loyal, to be brave, and to be honorable. And they get a message of praise here at the end of chapter 23. But I want you to notice one other thing here in this chapter, and that is the fact of the one that is not listed. You know, sometimes just as important as the ones that you see are the ones that you don't. And there is one name that we have become very familiar with that, if you'll look carefully in chapter 23, is not on the list. And that is the name of Joab. If you'll notice, both of Joab's brothers, Abishai and Asahel, are both going to be on this list. Remember, Asahel is going to die very early on, and then Abishai is going to be the one who's commanding the army even in the latter days of David. But Joab isn't on the list. Even though Joab is going to be with David for David's entire life, and much of that time he is going to be the commander of David's army. But Joab's actions have often shown themselves to be dishonorable. Joab's actions are ones that were often disobedient, often disregarding David's commands. And while Joab would go to great lengths to protect David, he is not given a place of honor in this list. Joab is not going to be described as one of David's mighty men, as one of the great company of men that David could rely on and that he could count on and that were worthy of honor and respect. As a matter of fact, as we're going to see as we get into 1 Kings, Joab is going to have a much more dubious relationship with David at the end of David's life. And so because of that, it is interesting to note, and it's necessary to learn the fact that even though Joab does not receive the punishment that he justly deserves, as far as that goes, for his actions and his disobedience in the days of David, it's left here for all to see just how David felt and how God felt about Joab's deeds and Joab's actions in his omission from this list of honor. These are some of the things that I've seen in 2 Samuel chapter 23. I hope that they're things that help and are beneficial to you. Next time we'll come back and we will begin examining the final chapter of the book of 2 Samuel. We hope that you'll join us then. And after this, we will be jumping into the book of 1 Kings and continuing our study. We hope that you're enjoying our studies of 1 and 2 Samuel, and that you'll join us for 1 Kings as well. But until then, have a great day.